This is going to be a continuation of the first video, basically refuting the 25 questions for evolutionists that I believe originated with Kent Hovind. As a quick side note, when I was trying to find the page again, I had noticed in one of the links was, "Did dinosaurs exist?" I didn't look at it, but I found that rather telling. The other thing that I wanted to address really quickly is that there's no such thing as an evolutionist. You wouldn't say questions for a gravitationalist or questions for a cellularist, you would simply say questions for a scientist. And it really is kind of making an unfair distinction to single out evolution when, the same percentage of scientists accept evolution as just about anything else. But nevertheless, I think that if they're going to call us evolutionists, it's a good idea to start calling Christians Jesusists. But nevertheless, my profile actually says that. But to continue where I left off, question number 16. There are thousands of examples of symbiosis that defy an evolutionary explanation. Why do we have to teach students that evolution is the only explanation? Well, out of those thousands of examples of symbiosis, you haven't listed a single one to refute. You simply say that they're there and don't go on. So there's really nothing to argue about there. 17. How would evolution explain mimicry? Do the plants and animals develop them by chance, by intelligent choice, or by design? Well, what type of mimicry? Are you talking about Batesian mimicry, Mullerian mimicry? You have to be more specific, but typically how mimicry works is that it's by chance, because the environment will select organisms which will either, develop eye spots, although that's not typically mimicry, or develop a body structure that's similar to a toxic animal. It has nothing to do with being... the animal, the butterfly, doesn't want to look like a monarch. It simply, through random mutations, birds will confuse it and not eat it because of that. And those which look like monarchs, which are poisonous, would be more likely to survive. So it's the environment that's doing the selection yet again. 18. How did man evolve feelings? Well, man wouldn't have directly evolved feelings such as love, mercy, guilt, and things like that. Instead, they would be coming about from pleiotropic interactions from having a higher mental function. Also, on a quick side note, human beings make terrible subjects for the study of evolution simply because we behave irrationally and our gene pool is so large. Because of things like this, we really just make awful studies, and it's much better to take a look at animals if you want to study natural selection and evolution actually in action. Question number 19. How did photosynthesis evolve? Well, that's really out of the scope of this discussion, but if you actually want to take a look at it, here's a paper from Cambridge that I'll link you guys to in the video description discussing it. But basically, cyanobacteria, for them, they were the first species or the first type of organism, rather, to evolve photosynthesis, and photosynthesis itself would be dependent on fixing nitrogen via nitrogenous enzyme system, which had to have evolved, I think it was about 2 billion years ago. So that would be the answer. If you're interested, take a look at this paper. 20. How did thought evolve? Again, it's just a pleiotropic interaction from having higher mental function. 21. How did flowering plants evolve and from what? Well, admittedly, I'm not really much of an expert on angiosperm evolution, but I will try and take a stab at it and tell you what I do know. Seeded plants evolved from seedless plants about 370 million years ago. Now, flowering plants evolved from seed plants about 130 to 125 million years ago. And I say that range because there's a fossil of a flower that's 125 million years old, but there's also fossilized pollen, which is indicative of flowering plants that's 130 million years old. So somewhere within that 5 million year time span. Now, why would flowers have evolved? There are two pretty much main reasons for that. The first being is that it opens up all sorts of complex symbiotic interactions with other organisms, such as pollinators, bees, butterflies, etc. The second reason would be that it increases genetic variation. Now, those pollinators can carry it a long distance, so you get a very high likelihood of having that sexual reproduction with a fairly different flowering plant, which is, of course, good. Increasing the genetic variation increases the resistance to disease and increases the likelihood that the organism will survive in a changing environment. Now, supporting this hypothesis that flowering plants came from seeded plants is the fact that there's a series of intermediate fossils showing intermediate steps between flowers forming and developing before we actually see full-fledged flowers. So, again, and of course, that completely supports evolution. 22. What kind of evolutionist are you? Why are you not one of the other 8 or 10 kinds? Well, first of all, the same thing could be asked about Christianity or any religion. I mean, how many denominations are there? Second of all, are you talking about scientists or what? I mean, again, this question is extremely vague, and in the scientific community, there's really no discrepancy. Nobody argues that evolution happens. It's more so just how it happens. 23. What would you have said 50 years ago had I told you that I had a living coelacanth in my aquarium? Well, first of all, I would have not really cared because the first coelacanth that was alive was discovered in 1938, which is more than 50 years ago, and was more than 50 years at the time this question list was written. Second of all, I would have said that's probably animal abuse, simply because you can't really keep a coelacanth in an aquarium safely with any regard for its health whatsoever. But thirdly, I really wouldn't have cared, because there's nothing about evolution that dictates when an animal has to go extinct. Take a look at horseshoe crabs or alligators. They've remained relatively unchanged for millions of years. Why? Because they're very well suited to their environment, and they're simply not under the same selective pressure to change. If you don't really, and again I hate to use verbs, but if you don't really need to change, then typically you don't, because the selective pressure, there's nothing to really improve on that much. 24. Is there one clear prediction of macroevolution that's proved true? Yeah, there are. In fact, there are thousands of it. In fact, macroevolution, as you could say, has been verified millions of times. It's tested hundreds of thousands of times every single day in labs all over, and it's never turned up with a piece of evidence that's gone against it. In fact, take a look at this video where I've summarized, or not really summarized, but I've given 3 examples of let's test some creationism versus evolution, where you look at the evidence and the predictions that each would make and see how that's true. 25. What's so scientific about the idea of hydrogen gas becoming human? Well, the fact that it's supported by evidence and that's been tested, observed, and verified and repeated, and you never see anything to the contrary. 26. Do you honestly believe that everything came from nothing? I would actually like to point out the irony in this question because that is exactly what creationists believe. They believe that God poofed the universe into existence, poor design and all. So, just aside from the irony, yet again, evolution has nothing to do with the creation of matter or energy. Furthermore, the author of the list is showing their ignorance by confusing and not knowing the difference between biology and physics. From here, the list diverges from a scientific discussion and goes more so into just randomness. 1. Are you sure that your answers are reasonable, right, and scientifically provable? Well, yes. Question 2. Do your answers show more or less faith in the person who said God must have designed it? Well, they show much less faith, simply because evolution is science. It's testable, makes predictions, and is falsifiable, and requires no faith whatsoever. Question number 3, is it possible that an unseen creator designed this universe? Well, yeah, I actually believe that. I'm a Christian, but the method is what's up for discussion here. Question 4, is it wise and fair to present the theory of evolution to students as fact? Yeah. Question 5, what's the end result of a belief in evolution? Well, scientific understanding. There have been many advancements made solely because of evolution. It's a unifying theory of biology, and when we understand that all organisms are related and how they're related, we can unite the disciplines and apply research gained in one area of biology to a completely different. So yeah, there are lots of end results for the better for evolution. If you want to look at socioeconomic factors, you could take a look at the percentage of people per country accepting evolution, and then the crime rates, murder rates, things like that for those countries, and they're typically extremely well correlated for the better. 6, do people accept evolution because of the following factors? It's all they've been taught. Many people? Yeah. Although it's really kind of hard to get away from God in this country. 6b, do they like the freedom from God? No. 6c, they're bound to support the theory for fear of losing their job or status or grade point average? No, not really. D, are they too proud to admit they're wrong? Some people, yes, but they're not wrong. 6e, evolution is the only philosophy that can be used to justify their political agenda. Well, as far as religion used for political agendas, I think that they're looking on the wrong way. 7. Should we continue to use outdated, disproved, questionable, or inconclusive evidences to support the theory of evolution because we don't have a suitable substitute, such as Piltdown Man? Well, I don't ever recall Piltdown Man being used to support the theory of evolution in the past 50 years. After that, Archaeopteryx, Lucy, Java Man, Neanderthal Man, horse evolution, vestigial organs. How are those inconclusive, questionable, disproved, or outdated? 8. Should parents be allowed to require that evolution not be taught as fact in their schools? No. Again, see my Teach Both video. Question 9, what are you risking if you're wrong? Well, again, as I'm not a big fan of Richard Dawkins, to quote him, what if they're wrong about the flying spaghetti monster? What if they're wrong about Zeus or Poseidon or any of that? Question 10, why are many evolutionists afraid of the idea of creationism being presented in public schools? Well, because that marks quite a few downfalls with society. One is that you're letting superstition and primitive minds dictate what's taught in the class. Merit has absolutely no place anymore. It's simply about political correctness and presenting every idea, no matter how idiotic or contradicted by evidence it is, as equal. Make no mistake, creationists don't care about morality or the evidence or presenting both sides to any argument. They don't want to present both sides to every argument, just one. They want one exception, and that's their argument. Buffer, 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 buffer.